I was asked to talk a little bit about my first root teacher, Philip Kapleau, Roshi Philip Kapleau. Begin with a few quotes. If you fall into poverty, live that way without grumbling. Then your poverty will not burden you. Likewise, if you are rich, live your riches. All this is the functioning of Buddha nature. In short, Buddha nature has the equality of infinite adaptability. Another quote, a Zen master, when asked where he would go after he died, replied, to hell, for that's where the help is needed most. And a third quote, to suppress the grief, the pain, is to condemn oneself to a living death. Living fully means feeling fully. It means becoming completely one with what you're experiencing and not holding it at arm's length. So Philip Kapleau was my root teacher, first teacher, person who introduced me to the Dharma. And to begin anything about history, I have a sign on my door that says, your memory is not accurate and may be entirely wrong. So what a 20-year-old guy 50 years ago saw in this person is very different than what a 50-year-old person would see with this person. Was very different than what a 70-year-old person would see with the same person. So, as I often say about these things, we make it all up. Because the way memory is stored is it's stored in little snitches, little bits. And then the mind very quickly fills in the surrounding area. So Roshi Kapleau was born in 1912. I don't know this is my direct experience, but this is what Wikipedia says. He was a bookkeeper in his high school. So that means that he was 20 during the Great Depression, right? At the depths of the Great Depression in this country, 1931-32, and it took actually almost till the war for the Depression to end. But he was a bookkeeper in high school, then he studied law, and then he became a court reporter for the Nuremberg war crimes trials and the Tokyo war crimes trials. So those of you who are younger, after World War II, when the Allies had won a very significant victory, they held big trials about the events that had happened in Germany, with the concentration camps, with just the human rights violations, with the Japanese, with the March of Bataan and the rape of Nanking, and just every grievance came up. And so they put all these people on trial, and they had somebody then, because recording devices weren't like they are now, they had somebody who actually typed out everything that went on, typed a transcript of the trial. So he had a company that did that. So that means he was present after the war during these people talking about these horrific things that had happened, both in Asia and in Germany. And he used to say that one of the things that impressed him most was that there was a very big difference in the cultural approaches to these trials. He said that the Germans often were very defensive and had a great, it was our job, we were right, we were following orders. And he said the Japanese are much more, this is our karma, we take responsibility for our life. And and he said that difference in attitude impressed him greatly and partly contributed to his interest in Dharma and Buddhism. So after he was in Tokyo, probably 45, 50, somewhere in there. And then he met D.T. Suzuki. D.T. Suzuki is one of the first people to actually bring Zen Buddhism from Japan into this country. He was a translator, a scholar, and he started teaching at Columbia University in New York. So Roshi Kapleau back in the 50s went to D.T. Suzuki's lectures on Zen and Dharma. And he got so inspired that in 1953, he went to Japan. Because he was interested in the direct, real experience. He'd read all these things Suzuki Roshi had translated, and one of the things that Suzuki Roshi emphasized was not kind of classic Dharma that talks about Theravadan approaches or Dzogchen approaches, but he talked a lot about enlightenment, a lot about koans, a lot about awakening. And Roshi Kapleau was filled with the aspiration to become enlightened. So he went to Japan, and after several adventures, ended up at Hoshinji Monastery, which is still a very, very active, functioning monastery right now, with Dayan Harada Roshi, different Harada Roshi than the Harada Roshi we talk about. And he was there at Hoshinji Monastery for 3 years. And he was in Japan for 13 years. And he was ardent for awakening. Roshi Kapleau tells this story. A young person came to a venerable master and asked, "How long will it take to reach enlightenment?" The master said, 10 years. The young person blurted, "That long?" The master said, No, I was mistaken. It will take you 20 years. The young man said, 20 years? The master said, come to think of it, maybe 30. So he went to Japan with great ardor, was in Hoshinji Monastery, one of the very first Westerners to actually end up in these monasteries. He was at Hoshinji for 3 or 4 years, and then he practiced with Yasutani Roshi in Kyoto, or Osaka, I forgot. Tokyo, for the next 9 years or so. So while he was there, he collected a whole bunch of teachings of Yasutani Roshi, some things that he had translated that he felt that were inspiring, some letters that had been around by Basui and other people, and he put them all together in a book called The Three Pillars of Zen. And it was one of the very first books that was really talked about the practice of Zen rather than the philosophy of Zen. Rather than interesting stories about Zen, he's really talked about his direct struggles and awakening, and so it became very popular. It was published in 1965, and in 1966 he came to the States and was invited to begin teaching in Rochester, New York. And so they found a place, they got a place together, things prospered, they grew out of it very quickly, and they found a place at 7 Arnold Park. And they had just renovated 7 Arnold Park when they had a big fire, and it just burnt the whole building. The whole center of the building was burnt up. So just after they had gotten this new building, renovated it, went into flames. And that's when I showed up, is the summer after the fire. And I visited in 1968, and I moved to Rochester on June 9th, 1969. I remember we were driving into Rochester and the sun was just rising, like 6 in the morning. It was just rising, and it was sort of bright and red. And I kind of said, this is a pivotal moment of my life. And you say those things, you never know what that means. So I was there in 1969 to about 1975. And the whole time I was there, I was basically put on jobs of plumbing and electrical work, fixing things. The same kind of thing I do now. I was in charge of the Zendo. In 1968, Philip Kapleau was 56 years old. So he started Great Vow at 56. And then I came at 20, moved in. And it was a very vital, very dynamic place. Here is something from the New York Times about that era. This is written in 1979. Today, Roshi Kapleau sees more older people moving toward Buddhism. In the 60s, it was mainly the young. They were disillusioned and in despair, many of them on the verge of suicide, he says. They felt the establishment was insincere, not meeting genuine needs. It's 1979. A lot of people, young people, were in drug trouble, looking for something. Many of them had no skills and could be called irresponsible. Young people wanted something simple, something worthwhile. I had to show them they could change their karma, a Buddhist and Hindu term meaning self-caused inevitability, which is not right, but that's what the article said. To do so meant to take responsibility for their own lives. I had to show them enlightenment came from within. So he began in 1968. We rebuilt the Zen Center in 1979. Quite a beautiful place. I still have lots of friends from that era. The 7 years I was there, I talked to pretty regularly, and many of them are Zen teachers in their own right in different places around the country. So for me, it was a very, very pivotal time. It really set me on the path of Dharma. During that time, I remember the first long session I ever did was August 1969 at a place called the Gratwick Place out in the country. And almost everybody's first session is really challenging, it's really difficult. And we just kept, I remember the first session, I just kept thinking about how can I get out of here and have ice cream? Because there was this ice cream place that was on the way to back on the way out and on the way back, people would stop at Meisen's Sol's ice cream. So my mind was just, get me out of here, get me out of here, get me out of here. Somehow, I stayed through my first session. The Kyosaku was used very lightly at that time, but somehow, because of the community, because of the Roshi, because of something, I stayed. Roshi Kapleau was very ethical, extremely meticulous about ethics. And one of the hallmarks of his lineage is, with one exception, with two exceptions, over the course of 50 years, things happen. By and large, the lineage is extremely meticulous and very, very ethical. And he inspired me to both the aspiration for awakening and that it took determination, that it took perseverance, that it took everything you got, and meticulous consideration of others. So he himself had great integrity, great determination. I mean, partly from my vantage point now, partly from my vantage point earlier, to actually try to start a whole community where there were 200 or 300 people coming in all the time at age 56, when you're about ready to retire, takes stamina and faith and many other things. During sesshin, he would read from Basui, the letters of Basui. They're in Three Pillars of Zen. They're quite inspiring, really talking about the nature of mind. Talking about, in order to be awakened, you have to see your own mind. You have to turn your awareness on your awareness and see the nature of mind. And he would love to talk about Hakuin Zenji. Philip Yampolsky had done the first translation of some of Hakuin's letters, and he was also very fiery. Hakuin used to say, just sitting around quietly is like taking a bunch of dead cow heads and trying to get them to eat by stuffing their mouths full of grass. Hakuin used to say that Zazen in activity was 1,000 times better than Zazen in stillness. So, and Roshi Kapleau used to say when he was in Sogenji or Hoshinji that they all not only would use the kyosaku a lot, which we don't use at all here, they would yell and shout at people. And he said there were lots of dogs underneath the zendo because the zendo was on a platform. So all these feral dogs would live underneath the zendo and have dog fights. And they were in the city. So they had traffic and they had dog fights and they had yelling in the zendo. And it was not like what we think of as a zendo, harmonious and calm and quiet. He said it was extremely dynamic. Very, very lively. And in a way, I think, while I love our particular environment and our lovely, calm, serene place, in a way it does us a disservice. When we were at ZCLA, ZCLA was right in the middle of the city and there were traffic accidents and there were, cars and gunshots and mariachi music and everything all happening all around us during sesshin. So you had to really learn to practice in the midst of chaos, which I think has got some advantages in its own side. Roshi Kapleau was an ardent vegetarian. He had stomach problems for much of his life and was very interested in diet. He used to say, pistols for two never kill more people than tea and toast. Pistols for two means dueling, you've got pistols for two. And then back when he was reading all these 19th century culture purists, he would quote things like that or say things like that. He was an ardent vegetarian, and he wrote a book called To Cherish All Life. So quoting again, anyone familiar with the numerous accounts of the Buddha's extraordinary compassion and reverence for living beings, for example, his insistence that his monks strain the water they drink lest they inadvertently cause death of any microorganisms, could never believe that he would be indifferent to the sufferings of domestic animals caused by their slaughter of food. Ultimately, the case for shunning animal flesh does not rest on what the Buddha allegedly said or didn't say. What it does rest on is our innate moral goodness, compassion, and pity, which, when liberated, lead us to value all forms of life. It is obvious, then, that willfully to take life, or through eating of meat indirectly to cause others to kill, through the eating of meat indirectly to cause others to kill, runs counter to the deepest instincts of human beings. So he was quite adamant. He used to say willy-nilly a lot. Willy-nilly. Willy-nilly kind of means, if you're not really watching, just willy-nilly, you end up in the place you didn't expect. Sort of random happenstance. They used to say grist for the mill a lot. Grist for the mill is an old 18th century term. Grist was any kind of grain that they would grow, that they would take to the mill to be ground up for flour. So we used to say grist for the mill. In his, again, this is from like the 70s probably. In his book, Zen, Dawn in the West, Roshi Kapleau writes that it's his job to take away much that is foreign to your true nature. The sticky beliefs, the chesty opinions, petty rationalizations, illusory ideals, and deluded thoughts, all of which imprison you as in a cocoon. Chesty opinions means you're kind of proud, sticking your chest out. Archaic term. And then he also talks about, one of the last quotes here, a small master hides themselves in the mountains. A great master hides themselves in the marketplace. So what is Dharma transmission? What is it that is passed on? So Roshi Kapleau is part of a Soto Rinzai mixed lineage, just like we are. Roshi Kapleau studied with teachers who were ordained in the Soto tradition, but who also practiced in the Rinzai tradition. They used koans, shikantaza, all the different approaches. We're in an eclectic tradition that goes way back. But what is transmission? What is it that's transmitted from one generation to the next? Because Roshi Kapleau was studied in Japan. He studied under two well-known, at least in this country, well-known Roshis, Dayan Harada and then Yasutani, Hakuin Yasutani Roshis. And he did not receive Dharma transmission from either of them after 13 years. He said that he and Yasutani Roshi had a falling out over whether they should chant the Heart Sutra in English or in Japanese, whether they should, Anglify the rituals. But I suspect it was two opinionated, grumpy old guys who just couldn't get along after a while and just were critical, and so they had a split. Someone asked Roshi Kapleau years later, he said, well, if Yasutani Roshi walked into the room right now, what would you do? He said, I would put my palms together and sincerely bow with apology for my blindness. Every new teacher is inadequate. In a way, we could say everybody is inadequate, because compared to what we could know, we know very little. Compared to what our ancestors, the archetypal ancestors in our lineage, we have practiced very little. Compared to the depths of mind that the sutras and a lot of the great writings talk about, we understand very little. So every teacher begins and perhaps even ends inadequate. And teaching is not about, as I often say, I know something here, I know the answer to this koan, and if you too knew the answer to this koan, you would be relieved, happy, free, whatever. And so guess what's in my mind? And that is not transmission, that's not even teaching. So in Dharma, especially in the Zen tradition, it's not about, okay, the teacher has got something here, and when you get that same something there, you will be then authorized. I think it's a very different matter. So transmission is a matter of trust. It's a matter of knowing someone. It's a matter of, I think, integrity. It's a matter of, is there a grounding in direct experience so that you can talk about the sutras and the teachings from your own direct, that you tasted something directly. And so you're not just talking intellectually about the Dharma, but you can actually feel and know, what are these people pointing at? Inadequately, incompletely, and yet with confidence. That's what the foundation of faith is based on, I think. We have an experience. That experience, of course, disappears because every experience that comes goes, and yet it leaves us with a residue of confidence and a residue of faith because we've touched something. So transmission is different in different places. We could say people like Eckhart Tolle and Byron Katie, perhaps Adyashanti, and I'm sure there's lots of more people out there, are usually called Pradika Buddhas. That is, they heard the truth and had a realization about the truth, but hadn't gone through, at least traditionally, a whole lot of training about how do you face all of these problems, and what's the container that allows you to hold other people. I think these days that container is very different than it was in the old days. So Roshi Kapleau wrote the 3 Pillars of Zen. He was invited to start teaching. He had a small teaching group, and it grew, and it grew, and it grew, and it grew, until he had students all over the world, centers all over the world. So in a way, transmission is not just something, I give you this, but it also is the universe call something forth. So the universe is in a way it's a backward transmission. We need somebody to occupy this role, and we're going to pull you into it. So in a way, it's not, somebody from the past gives you something in the present, which you then give into the future, but rather it's the future is calling. The world is calling you into your position. We are products of our times. So there's this transmission by students, there's the transmission by teachers, there's also a confidence in oneself. Dan Brown, when he used to come here, used to say he was very happy to be here because we were a lineage tradition. That we had ancestors, that we had people that we looked up to. There's been a little break in that connection because of the change from Japan to America. We don't have the deep connections that were we embedded in a culture we would have with the forebears. But when people like Kapleau and Maezumi Roshi and Harada Roshi and other people, when you're there in your hearts, then of course you're connected to what's there. So transmission is an acknowledgement, a faith, a trust, a confidence. It's an embodiment. It's a affirmation that the first of the 4 Bodhisattva vows is deeply in one's heart. And it's a calling forth. We never know where we're going to end up. We never know how it's going to look. We never know. And we step one step into the unknown, one step into the unknown, one step into the unknown. And we may have some idea, we may think that we know where it's going to end up or how it's going to unfold, but really we don't. It's really a guessing. It's really a mystery. Basui has a line which Roshi Kapleau used to say, I'm trying to remember it here. And with your hands thrown high into the air, take one step into the primordial void of your own true nature. Something like that. Into not knowing. One step from the top of a 100-foot pole. We know the pole, but take one more step into the unknown, into the groundless. So, transmission is partly that willingness to take that step. Don't know how it's going to go. Another aspect of working with Harada Roshi, working with Kapleau, even though it was so many years ago that I really knew Roshi Kapleau, I think that there is a heart connection. That's what they mean by a root teacher. It's a connection with the root of your being. And that heart connection with their root connects with their root, connects with the previous roots, connects with the previous roots, connects with the roots, with the roots, with the roots. So the heart connection from the root of your being to the root of someone else's. Not just in the personality sense, but in an essence sense. Wakes something up in you. And that waking up, and that expression with the first, with bodhicitta, awakening for the benefit of all beings, is transmission. The other person who has been of great influence in our tradition here is Shodo Harada Roshi. And I'll just say a couple things about him. Harada Roshi was a temple, his family was a temple family. He grew up in a Soto Rinzai family? Rinzai family. And he was not at all interested in Dharma or Buddhism. He wanted to become a lawyer, he wanted to become a psychologist. And he says, it's written up, I think, in Morning Dewdrops of the Mind, if you're interested, that one day he was out traveling to the city and he saw this person who had a glow. And he was just sitting on a bus reading a book. And he became so intrigued with this person that when he got off the bus, he followed him into a temple. And that person turned out to be Mumon Roshi, his teacher. And he said that from that time when he recognized that glow of Mumon Roshi, he was called to practice. And he went and entered the training monastery, Shofukuji. Had a number of experiences. And then about, 30 years ago? 30 years ago, he inherited the temple Sogenji in Okayama. And a fellow student of his, or fellow student with him, of Mumon Roshi, Chisan, Priscilla Stordant, he asked her if she would come and join him, if the two of them together could work and build a place that Westerners could come to. And so they moved to Sogenji. She was his translator. And he began doing a training in Japan, which, according to Tom Kirshner, our friend in Japan, who knows all these Roshi stories, he says it was unique in modern Japan. And what was unique is he would start doing sesshin once a month. He would do a 7-day sesshin, 7 full days. And before and after the sesshin, he would do kind of a half sesshin. And then there was a week off just to work. And so almost year-round, there would be 12 long sesshin, 12 o sesshin, and then there would be 24 ko sesshin, several days before or after. And the essential difference was he didn't do teisho during the ko sesshin, but he did do teisho in the o sesshin. And he would see people in the Rinzai style where everybody worked on koans. And to work on a koan, you would go in to see Harada Roshi, and you'd present your koan. Go in, you do your bows, present your koan, get some interaction with him, and leave. So those meetings could be very vigorous and very fast. So when he was younger, Harada Roshi was younger, he would see people during Osishin sometimes 3 times a day. Present yourself, present yourself, present yourself, present yourself. And to present oneself with clarity, presence, to present oneself with confidence, present oneself with empty, present oneself with fully engaged, and do the koan, that could be seen just quickly. How you walk in, how you bow, how you sit down reveals your state of mind. Always. So how people leave their shoes around here reveals their state of mind. Sometimes you can see people who have got their shoes half off and they're already someplace else, and so the shoes are disheveled or not in alignment. But to actually align your shoes, to pay attention to the whole process of taking your shoes off. So that meticulous way is the Soto school tends to emphasize that. The Rinzai school tends to emphasize the wholehearted, direct, vibrant interaction. Well, Chosen and I were at ZCLA for a number of years. Chosen was there longer than I was. And we moved up here in the early 80s. And around 1991, I got restless and was looking for somebody else to do Sesshin with. I think there had been some problems at ZCLA or some problems with one of the teachers there, and I felt like I wanted to take a step away. And so I looked in the Northwest Dharma News. It was a newspaper at that time, or a booklet magazine. And I saw Harada Roshi's picture, and I said, no, maybe this is the person. And it was 1990, 1991. And so I went to his first or second sesshin in this country. And I was hooked. So over the next 25 years, I would go to sesshin very frequently, maybe 60, 70 weeks of sesshin. And Chosen came to sesshin with Harada Roshi many times also. So in a way, Kapleau influenced us at the root, but Harada Roshi, at least certainly for me, Harada Roshi influenced me much more in terms of spiritual practice and engagement and lively functioning and even the container. So from ZCLA we used to do oryoki, Zendo style oryoki. We'd set with 3 bowls and had servers. But at Sogenji, they would do a much more abbreviated style. So they would do the kind that we're doing now, which you just have your own bowls, you unwrap them, you serve yourself, you wrap them back up. And there's lots of detail and ritual that's missing from the Soto. So that style of vigorous engagement has always, at least impacted me. Feeling like Harada Roshi used to say, it is really good to be able to do things other people can't do. That is, you have developed yourself in some way that there's a skill that you have that is not one that everybody else can do. And he used to have, when he was younger, enormous stamina. Hardly sleep. He would do sanzen 3 times a day. He would do Dharma talks. He would then have public meetings he would go to. He would just be on and on and on and on and on. And he took care of the old Roshi that preceded him at Sogenji at night. Enormous stamina. Just give himself completely, over and over again. So he's a very, very moving and inspiring person. And the Dharma that we have here is, of course, contains elements from Kapleau Roshi, from Izumi Roshi, from Genpo Roshi, from Harada Roshi, from Chisan Roshi, plus all the other teachers that we've had come through here, all the Vajrayana and Tibetan teachers. And it all has resulted in this. Because that's the way karma is. All of our entire karma results in this. People often ask, well, where will you go when you die? Well, if you look carefully, every single other part of you is already dead. And this is the afterlife. So here's where you go. And when this is dead, here's where you go. Because here is the result. It's the afterlife of every single other life and every single other thing you've lived. Here's where you go. Here's where you go. How could you go anywhere else? I'm sorry, I got sidetracked. So anyhow, we're very, 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 very blessed, very fortunate to have all of these wonderful contacts with great Dharma teachers in so many different traditions. And I hope that all of you will be able to share that and unfold the Dharma in your unique way. The Dharma, we are never, ever, ever, ever finished learning. I was, one of my slideshows, I always used Michelangelo's quote at age 85 or 90, I am still learning. So I think it is true with all of our previous teachers, it's true now, it will always be true, that the deeper we go, the deeper it gets. The further we go, the more we can see the possibility. So every teacher is inadequate compared to the immensity of the unknown mystery. And here we are. So I hope all of you are inspired in your own way and really unfold the Dharma and help other people. Lots of ways.